few remaining supporters of human rights projects in the country. Thank you very much, Renuka, for coming all the way and addressing the human rights institution members here. Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Henry Tiffane, but before that, I would just like to tell you, Henry Tiffane साहब human rights और मानवाधिकार के मामले में बहुत पुराने स्तंभ है अपने आप में. पीपल्स वॉच के फाउंडर और ऐनी जिसकी हम बात कर रहे हैं, ऐनी के नेशनल वर्किंग सेक्रेटरी, ह्यूमन राइट डिफेंस अलर्ट से भी फाउंडर हैं और ह्यूमन राइट्स के फील्ड में सभी लोग इनका नाम जानते हैं. बाय ट्रेनिंग एडवोकेट बट बाय प्रैक्टिस ह्यूमन राइट्स ओनली, नॉट इन द कोर्ट, आउट इन द कोर्ट. मिस्टर हेनरी टिफेन.
Dr. Rajkumar, Dr. YSR, Renuka, and colleagues around the table. Good morning. Thank you for being here, for taking the trouble to travel from Haryana, Punjab, Chandigarh, and Himachal Pradesh, and also Uttar Pradesh. Somebody is from Uttar Pradesh. One person from Uttar Pradesh. Okay, she's from Uttar Pradesh. To be here. The speciality of this program is that we have people sitting here officially representing different institutions, but are personal friends to us for quite some time. Dr. Rajkumar rightly said, the youngest Vice Chancellor of this country is an old friend, and we are extremely thankful to him for allowing us to dabble in this institution while the academic programs are going on. It's not, you see lots of students running here and there in the corridor, running to classes, coming out of classes, but still allowing us to also make use of the campus and be educated through a number of things that are going on in the campus. We know we have a permanent invitation here, but we also know that there are academic priorities that this institution has, and in those priorities, for having given INI a space, we are thankful to you, Dr. Raj. We are thankful to YSR because he is our advisor, not because he is the dean of this, registrar of this university and the executive director of the Center for Human Rights alone, but also because he is our advisor for INI, a position which he holds through difficult times sometimes. It's not always easy to be told outside that you are an advisor to INI, because that almost means that NHRC will not be too welcoming to you. So that's the difficulty of being in an organization like INI, which critically looks at different institutions across the country. We are extremely happy, even with YSR, a very long association. I still remember, I think it is from 95 that we have been associating with each other in different levels during his different responsibilities he held within the NHRC. Now, this effort of working with you is because there is nobody who works with state human rights institutions in this country. The government never trained any one of you. The government only appointed you. Nobody gave you a training. Nobody gave you materials before. And therefore, usually it is the member secretary who thinks, usually it is a he who thinks that he should be able to tell you what you have to do. And the member secretary thinks this way, the commission has to think this way. The member secretary thinks this way, the commission has to think this way. This has been usually the procedure across the country, because there is no introduction. The member secretaries themselves don't have any introduction, unfortunately. And in that background, I want to ask the Vice Chancellor, you always immediately jump on to new ideas. Here is a new idea being given. No training in this country for 160 institutions, not one or two, 160 institutions, which comprise state human rights commissions, state commissions for women, state commission for children, state minority commissions, the commissioner for persons with disabilities, the state commission where it exists for scheduled castes, for scheduled tribes, Safai Karmacharis, and I think I've named and the state information commission. And backward class, usually they don't have any complaint sending functions, but anyhow, they also them. They don't have any training in this country. And I think we badly need, if what Renuka said, that the possibility of each one of you blossoming and doing a lot of work in your commissions, if only you are also provided backup support, training, introduction, I'm sure the amount of work you will be able to accomplish would be a lot. And to the university, INE would be willing to partner if you think of a program of this sort, which could be a continuous process, which could be done along with the governments. The governments would be willing to collaborate if a university is taking the responsibility and take something like this forward, because this country just doesn't have one. Second, the pathetic state of affairs of these commissions, which we will come to know in the next 2 days, is the vacancies that exist. Total vacancies. I'm so happy to see 1, 2, 3, 4 state commission for women members from Haryana. This is a revolution. If you have the chairperson and all the members present in one commission, that itself is a revolution, if they were appointed. Many places it is vacancies after vacancies. In some governments, I heard in Goa, if I'm right, you have a policeman who is an investigating officer in the State Human Rights Commission, who is also the secretary, acting secretary of the State Commission for Children, and the acting secretary of the State Commission for Women. Am I right? This is in Goa. Now, how many scenes can this one policeman act? He has to act first as investigator, then he has to act as secretary, then he has... I mean, pity that man. Poor, he's an IAS officer or IPS officer, therefore he keeps his mouth shut. But at least people like us in civil society have to speak about these kind of things. So vacancies is a very major problem. Vacancies, infrastructure, staffing, not only training, but all these are resources, financial resources. These are all what our institutions are lacking in this country. Mind you, we may have just got 1 gold or 1 silver in the Olympics. But if there is an Olympics for state human rights institutions, no state can stand in front of us because we have that number of institutions. But unfortunately, we have not invested on those institutions as much as we should. And I think therefore the second demand is that with such bright students and faculty in this university, is it also possible for the university to continue to work with us to see the possibilities of areas of research, particularly referring to these institutions? And then not that the research should criticize some institution, but the research will enable the institution to say where the resources for that institution need to come. Look at your websites. What is the type of information that the public need for your websites? I think this will be a long-term collaborative effort that this institution can play, the university can play with institutions across the country. So these are 2 very special requests, because we won't have the Vice Chancellor for the next 2 days. He's busy with a very important international program that he's organizing. So therefore I thought I should use this little space to link you and the university in a long term, and I'm sure EU will be happy that these kind of institutional relationships happen, so that we don't depend only on small projects, but longer sustainable programs which can help strengthen these institutions. Feel at home, as Harsh said. Harsh will be our official translator into chaste Hindi to make sure that the materials that are being shared, the experiences that are being shared are shared a lot. And the one good thing about institutions today is, which I am personally very happy, is that there are less men and more women. I think that itself is change. That you find a lot of women in the room. Not only this program. I'm not talking about this program alone, but even the previous program, the program we had in Tata Institute of Social Science for the Western region, lots of women. Maybe we are not as strong as we can always be, but if we strengthen you with a lot of information, you can definitely lead these institutions into agents of change for human rights in your respective states. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. हिंदी जी ने बताया, मैं बहुत संक्षिप्त में 2 मिनट में इसको कर लेता हूँ कि एक तो अपॉइंटमेंट हो जाते हैं, सरकार अपॉइंटमेंट कर लेती है, लेकिन लगता है कि एक खाना पूर्ति पूरी हो गई, कि कुछ करना था कुछ लोगों को रख दिया है, कभी कभार कुछ अपने चाहने वालों को रख दिया, पार्किंग लॉट टाइप से बना दिया। इन्होंने बात कही जितना इन्वेस्ट करना चाहिए ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस में, जो इनकी प्रासंगिकता है वो ख़त्म इसलिए हो रही है कि शायद हमारी सरकारें इनको सीरियसली नहीं लेती हैं और इन्फॉर्मेशन नहीं है लोगों के पास, ना तो इसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट की, ना इनकी फंक्शनिंग की, ना इंडिपेंडेंस की। और शायद जो प्रोग्राम जो हम ये कर रहे हैं, इस तरह के प्रोग्राम्स के बाद जो ज़्यादा सूचना मिलेगी, जो ज़्यादा इन्फॉर्मेशन होगी, उससे शायद ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस ज़्यादा मजबूती से उभरें और ज़्यादा अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मानकों पर ज़्यादा खरे उतरें। इसके अलावा इम्पॉर्टेंट बात जो हेनरी साहब ने बताई वो ये है कि इतने सारे 170 प्लस इंस्टीट्यूशंस हमारे देश में, यूरोप के कई देशों की मिला के इतने HRIs नहीं है। कई देशों को अगर आप एक साथ मिला दें, भारत में इतने ज़्यादा है, लेकिन वही बात है कि खाना पूर्ति वाली बात हो रही है। जिंदल ग्लोबल यूनिवर्सिटी से हमारी ये आशा है कि आने वाले समय में, क्योंकि यहाँ पर वाइस चांसलर साहब और रजिस्ट्रार साहब दोनों का एक बहुत ही स्ट्रॉन्ग बैकग्राउंड है ह्यूमन राइट्स में, एकेडमिकली अदरवाइज ऑल्सो, कि हम लोग आगे चल के कोई एक इंस्टीट्यूशनल पार्टनरशिप रिसर्च के मामले में हम लोग तय करें, यहाँ से निकले कि ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस को लेके, मेंबर्स को लेके, फंक्शनिंग को लेके कुछ ऐसी रिसर्च पैदा हो कि ऐनी जो एक फोरम है कई सारे इंडिविजुअल्स और संगठनों का, और यूनिवर्सिटी जो कि कमिटेड है पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट के लिए और पब्लिक गुड के लिए, मिलके कुछ रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट अब साथ साथ करें। थैंक यू वेरी मच हेनरी। नाउ मैं इनवाइट प्रोफेसर सी राजकुमार।
नमस्कार, आप सब लोग के लिए स्वागत है ओपी जिंदल ग्लोबल यूनिवर्सिटी में। मैं क्षमा चाहता हूँ, मैं अंग्रेज़ी में बोलूँगा। मैं वैसे कन्याकुमारी से हूँ और थोड़ा बहुत हिंदी बोल लेता हूँ, लेकिन मैं प्रेफर करूँगा इंग्लिश में बोलने के लिए। I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to OP Jindal Global University. It is indeed our proud privilege and honor to host the Regional Colloquium for Human Rights Institutions. As my good friend Henry Tippene said, that our commitment to the cause of protecting and promoting human rights predates the establishment of the university. A number of our faculty members and students are deeply engaged in a range of issues related to human rights. I would like to thank Mr. Henry Tippene as well as his colleagues, including Dr. Harsh Dobel and all of you to have given us the opportunity to host here. I will immediately respond to Mr. Henry Tippene's suggestion that we would like to collaborate with ANI as well as other relevant organizations, including the state human rights institutions, for doing both training, capacity building, as well as research related to the advancement and strengthening of the human rights mechanisms in the country. Many of us have in the past, both Professor Murthy for a longer time and I for a shorter time, associated with the National Human Rights Commission, and I would like to believe that we were associated with the commission at its good times. जैसे हमारा प्राइम मिनिस्टर अक्सर बोलते रहते हैं अच्छे दिन, वो अच्छे दिन के टाइम पे हम लोग वहाँ काम करते थे, और we have seen the best of what the National Human Rights Commission could do. And unfortunately, it is public knowledge that we have destroyed many of these institutions, and they have come to a stage where the recovery is going to be even more difficult. I will keep it short and I will briefly introduce some of the things that I believe as important reflections for the growth and evolution of human rights institutions. I also recognize the presence of Ms. Srinivasan from European Union and thank you for their contribution towards strengthening the mechanisms. I can kind of understand the larger political context in which why countries like India are sort of resistant towards having the sort of EU-India dialogue in human rights. I think it may be important for EU to redefine its engagement in India and countries like India, because the society and the context has significantly changed from what it used to be 2 decades ago. But then the policy orientation of the engagement of regional institutions in developing countries such as India has not changed significantly. And if you really want to have a more meaningful engagement in India, this has to be a partnership-based engagement as opposed to EU. And this is also not only because of what has happened in India. There is a growing recognition around the world that many developed countries and societies themselves have been rather hypocritic in their own ability to enforce and advance the human rights agenda. And so within that context, if EU needs to play a more legitimate role in India. It has to completely redefine and strategize its engagement in the new context. That wanted to briefly reflect on that. I want to once again recognize the fact that the role and responsibility of all of you in strengthening and advancing human rights is so significant, because we all know human rights are enforced at the local level. Notwithstanding the legal framework, the constitutional framework, and the legislative tools and the mechanisms that are at times brought it from the top, what ends up happening is the enforcement of human rights taking place at the state level. Unfortunately, I would say that this we have never paid attention. So Henry is absolutely right that almost all efforts in the past have been entirely devoted to the national commissions only. So if you look at, and even then there is a hierarchy of national commissions. We all know that, right? The National Human Rights Commission, and then you go down further, there will be children, women, minorities, and so this, and now the Central Information Commission has kind of got more prominence of some kind. So in some ways we all have to share this blame and responsibility of systematically undermining the state institutions to define its role. While vacancies is one problem which Henry has mentioned, but we have a larger vacancy issue in the country, right? I mean, there are some 200 High Court judges which are been not appointed. Our Chief Justice of India is in tears. Statements are being made by both politicians and judges. So vacancy problem is not only a problem that the state human rights institutions are facing, it is a larger problem that the judiciary is also facing, and we need to address it. But within that, and I think one of the things that we all need to learn, and I know all of you are there, you are fighting the battles, is that it is never going to be a perfect situation. You will always be struggling. There will be always challenges, because for those of us who have in the past or continue to work in the field of human rights, it is always going to be an attempt to push the envelope and create new opportunities to make change, to intervene. And it is in this context I want you to recognize that there is so much of violations of human rights which is obvious in our country, but there is also a lot of hope and expectations that all of you will help in that. So if you look at while many of us have been critical of the National Human Rights Commission and, for example, other human rights commissions, if you start looking at the complaints that these commissions have been receiving from its establishment in 1993, complaints have not come down. It has only increased. So there are human rights violations. People are, reaching out with hope and expectation that you will intervene, notwithstanding the huge structural and systematic problems in relation to the ability to redress these human rights violations. So in a way, I want us to and you to recognize in particular that there are huge expectations within the society with regard to your ability to respond to these human rights violations. The second is this whole issue of why the state human rights institutions or human rights institutions in general are uniquely positioned as opposed to other institutions which are also, let's say, advancing human rights agenda. Arguably the parliamentarians, the state legislative assemblies, institutions such as the judiciary, for example, are also involved in some form of advancement of human rights. But there is no institution, similar to you, as in be it in the Human Rights Commission or in the Child Rights or other commissions in the state, whose only responsibility is directly in relation to human rights. Not even the judiciary. In fact, the very rationale for the establishment of the Human Rights Commissions was that many other institutions which may be involved in this are tangentially and indirectly connected to the advancement of human rights, but you have been mandated with the sole task of advancing, protecting and promoting human rights. And that's a very unique responsibility, and so you are not distracted and don't need to be distracted by anything else. The second aspect of the establishment of human rights institutions is a more complex one, and it's important for us to recognize that, which is that you are not an NGO. And I think this is something which you need to understand. Not that NGOs are anything inferior, but they perform a different role in society. Non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, media, for example, are performing a very different role and responsibility as opposed to the institutions, the human rights institutions established by the state and its instrumentalities. You are essentially created under the state regime. However, you are different from the department of, let's say, or for that matter, the education or any department or ministry of, HRD or whatever, because of the fact that you may be very much part of the governmental system, but you have a unique role and responsibility to show the mirror to the government. And that's a unique responsibility which an NGO cannot play, the media cannot play. You are within the government, but yet you have been legislatively, legally, constitutionally, institutionally given the powers and functions to pretty much show a mirror on the face of the government. That's a very big role. I mean, it all depends upon you can, in fact, the rationale for the state to create you is precisely to come with the kind of legitimacy and credibility that, let's say, for example, the non-governmental organizations which may not be privy to certain information or might have potentially some other agendas to it may not have it. So in that sense, the role of state human rights institutions, state commissions or state established commissions is quite unique and extraordinary, which is unparalleled to any other human rights institutions. And this, of course, comes with huge responsibility, because you are essentially asked to do a role where potentially you may find it awkward because you may have loyalties to the people who might have appointed you in the first place. And this is not a unique dilemma that you're facing. Courts, judges do face that, and some other institutions face it. But it is important for you to recognize that besides the legislation, you are working on the basis of the public trust. The public trust is the foundation for your appointment, and that is why it is important for you to recognize that even in adverse circumstances, when you are going to take decisions, pass orders and directions, and even create situations where government officials, state government ministers, or even the chief minister, for example, in states need to be hauled up for not sufficiently protecting human rights or not doing enough, you need to respond to that. Now, it is here that my own experience of looking at commissions around the world is very telling. Many a time, and I'll give you a scenario, for example, internationally. So many a time, many human rights commissions around the world are set up because of some international pressure. Some UN resolution or some, European, pressure or whatever, people set up commissions. And sometimes even governments think that, let's set up this commission. We really are not keen to, actually protect human rights. Let's show that we have a commission. Our foreign service people can, represent in the UN system that we have a commission. We appoint our, friends and people who will be pliant, and it will be fine. Notwithstanding the fact that this might have been the intention for governments, and India is not an exception, to set up these commissions, the commission acquires its own stature, there is an evolutionary process. The governments might have had their own agenda, but you as individuals, after your appointment, you don't owe it to the people who appointed. You are functioning on the basis of that legislative and constitutional trust that has been deposed upon you. Your loyalty and your commitment is to that institutional framework and legislative design that has given that powers and functions to you. And that's something which I would like all of you to recognize, that because of the fact that the social expectations in a country like India is so huge. And the worst thing that can happen is that people should start looking at you differently from how they look at the government. You are not the government. You are, in some ways, you are supposed to be speaking truth to power. That's the most important mandate of human rights institutions. If you're going to be speaking truth to power, obviously you need to have a good understanding of what constitutes truth, how you're going to find the truth, and how independently, impartially you're going to have a process which will enable you to find the truth. And that's one of the most difficult tasks, and that's where what Henry mentioned early on is a lot of effort needs to be done in relation to capacity building and training and how effectively you need to exercise your powers. At the end of the day, the moment you start exercising those powers effectively, impartially, neutrally, independently, in a country like India, you will immediately get the trust of the people. And once people start trusting this institution, I am convinced no force on earth, no political power, and no form of other powers and vested interests can undermine the institution, because it's entirely in your hands. You will function with that autonomy and independence and will see the difference. And that's where you will have to maintain a very sophisticated equidistance, both from non-governmental organizations, from intergovernmental organizations, and from the government. And I say this with a full sense of responsibility, because I am familiar with the human rights movement, including the role of NGOs. And NGOs are your partners in this endeavor. At the same time, your views and perspectives will be defined by your own larger and more deeper and more nuanced understanding of what is possible within the government. And NGOs are in some ways empowering you to arrive at that understanding. And this is not going to be easy. This is an evolutionary process. You will learn from your experiences what you might have done a couple of years ago. You will discover that may not be the right thing to do. And this is a continuous evolutionary process. By the way, you will not be the unique institution in the country or in the world to do that. Many parts of the world have experimented with these models, and it's a continuous process. Malaysia is a very good example. When Malaysian Commission was established, there was widespread skepticism in the early years for it to become a sort of a lame duck type situation. But there were moments, because of the chairpersons and members, and that's where all of you come. I mean, the fascinating part of this program is what each one of you individually is capable of seeking a transformative change in the field of human rights by your own work, because, and the reason this because is important is that we are a democracy. Notwithstanding governments and individuals holding positions of power and responsibility, exercising that power and abusing it, the fact remains that because we are a democracy, and there is a relatively free and independent media, your ability to exercise that power independently, autonomously, and in a neutral manner is going to be out there for public scrutiny, and that public scrutiny is going to always provide a safeguard for your ability to function effectively. I will also quickly reflect on two issues which I think are very important, which is related to the scope and the powers and the functions of the state human rights institutions. For a long time, the state human rights institutions, including the human rights commissions, had confined their mandate to what we call civil and political rights. And in fact, it was argued that the human rights institutions are best suited only to take care of civil and political rights. These are rights relating to, for example, freedom from torture or freedom of speech and expression, or things which are, let's say, easily, one can identify it and stop it, and one can say that you shouldn't do it. But over the years, at least for the last 2 decades, there is global recognition and understanding that the human rights mandate should not be confined to civil and political rights, economic and social and cultural rights, including the right to food, the right to education, and of course we in India have even legislated the right to employment guarantee and many other rights in the broad framework of economic and social rights. So to the extent possible, I hope that you will constantly push the envelope and to always interpret your own powers in a broader manner towards achieving justice. In some ways, you are not a court, and that comes with some advantages too. You have jurisdictional powers to determine what constitutes human rights in many areas, and since that is anyways an interpretive tool, you need to always look at opportunities to help and intervene on matters that come before you, so long as you believe that there is justice that ought to be done. The second part of it, which I will say, is also about the fact that you need to, educate yourself a lot. I am actually very happy that many of you who have come into these commissions are not coming from legal backgrounds, or for that matter lawyers, or even people who have dabbled with these issues. That brings in a lot of fresh perspective. We in India are obsessed with the fact that many of these commissions have to be only by judges. It's a very big mistake. I don't know whether you know, but the Judicial Appointments Commission in England, a commission to appoint the judges doesn't have any judge. The entire commission are people who are not judges. So we have this obsession, and they are responsible people with integrity and honesty and rectitude, but people represent different walks of life. It could be a lawyer, professor, scientist, whatever. So in a way, this is one area where but then I also want to say that since these people, many of you might have come from backgrounds which may not be in law, it's all the more important for you to become familiar with the legal framework, the institutional framework, the international human rights agenda, the various cases decided by the courts, because you know what? Most of the time you are not reinventing the wheel. You are reminding the government to follow the law, follow what has already been decided by courts, high courts and Supreme Court, by institutions, sometimes even governments themselves. We in India are facing a unique situation where governments across the country are violating its own laws, rules, regulations, procedures, guidelines, process. So in some ways, knowledge is key to our effective functioning. You need to be involved in training, and I'm committing as Vice Chancellor of Jindal Global University that we will be most delighted to host you and also many of your colleagues across the country. Henry and myself and Professor Murthy will begin the process of evolving a sustained long-term agenda for promoting training and capacity building among the state human rights institutions. It's a long and arduous journey, but it's worth taking it because I am convinced that the governments are not going to do it. They have enough vested interest not to have any of you function effectively, not to have any of your institutions succeed in that, not because of the fact that there is a conspiracy. This is not a priority, which is unfortunate. There is a high level of indifference and lethargy on the part of governments. By the way, regardless of political parties, let us be very clear, whichever government is in power, the support to the human rights institutions has been relatively marginal, and in fact, when people end up going in opposition, they begin to support human rights institutions more because there may be own personal agendas to use the human rights institutions for scoring political agendas in that matter. You need to be conscious of it, mindful of it, and always maintain your neutrality and independence. I want to stop here. I want to thank you for your patience. It's a pleasure to host you at our campus. Henry mentioned that he thanked us as a university to host. I want to say that this is our duty. This is our duty and responsibility as an academic institution. This Mahatma Gandhi talked about the idea of public trust, and more importantly, the idea of wealth to be some sort of a public ownership. Universities are, whether they are public or private, heart of it, they are public institutions. That has been the vision of our Chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, and it has been our own mission to throw open these institutions for all kinds of democratic discourses, for all kinds of programs and perspectives, to bring people from all walks of life into this conversation. We are very delighted that you're all here, and I hope you will come back. Thank you.
थैंक यू वेरी मच सर. राजकुमार साहब ने 2-3 बातें बहुत ब्रीफ में बताना चाहता हूँ. पहली बात तो ये बताइए कि आपका जो जगह है ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशन की, वो अद्वितीय है. ना तो आप सरकार है, ना आप एनजीओज हैं. और ये समझने की ज़रूरत है कि सरकारें भले अपॉइंट करती हैं, सरकारों ने आपका चयन किया है, लेकिन जो लेजिस्लेटिव फ्रेमवर्क है, जो कानून है, उसने आपको एनफ फ्रीडम दे रखी है कि आप अपना काम उसी हिसाब से करें जिस हिसाब से करना है. और उसके लिए सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट चीज़ है पब्लिक ट्रस्ट, कि जब तक पब्लिक का ट्रस्ट आप लोग नहीं जीते तब तक ह्यूमन राइट्स की कॉज को हम लोग आगे नहीं बढ़ा पाएंगे. दूसरी इंपॉर्टेंट बात इन्होंने बताई कि कई बार क्या होता है इंटरनेशनली कि एक इंटरनेशनल मूवमेंट बना है एक इंटरनेशनल कॉन्टेक्स्ट है ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस का, जो कई देशों में बने हैं, क्योंकि एक इंटरनेशनल फ्रेमवर्क का जो एक तरह का दबाव सरकारों पर डालता है, और सरकारें अपनी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय छवि सही करने के लिए कई बार ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशन बना लेती हैं और अपने दोस्तों को, लोगों को अपॉइंट कर लेती हैं। लेकिन समय के साथ साथ, और उन्होंने मलेशिया का एग्जाम्पल दिया, कई जगह का दिया, कि समय के साथ साथ इंस्टीट्यूशंस अपना एक अलग से स्टेटस खड़ा कर लेते हैं। तो सरकार की जो भी मंशा रहा हो, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर अपनी जो भी छवि बनाने के चक्कर में एक फॉर्मेलिटी पूरी करने के चक्कर में आप बना दें, लेकिन ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस का जो इंटरनेशनल एक्सपीरियंस वीसी साहब ने बताया ऐसा रहा है कि वो अपने आप अपना एक स्टेटस बना लेते हैं और एक इंडिपेंडेंट इंस्टीट्यूट के रूप में वो खड़े हो जाते हैं। इसके बाद अंत में आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। आपने कहा कि आईनी के साथ और आप लोगों के साथ हम लोग ट्रेनिंग का मामला हो, रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट्स का मामला हो, एक लॉन्ग टर्म मैकेनिज्म हम लोग तैयार करेंगे। आपको बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। हम लोग इसके बाद एक छोटा सा एक फोटोग्राफी सेशन यहाँ पर है, एक कलेक्टिव फोटोग्राफ, उसके बाद चाय, और चाय के बाद 12 बजे वापसी। शुक्रिया। आई वुड लाइक टू वेलकम प्रोफेसर सी विश्वनाथन एंड वुड लाइक टू रिक्वेस्ट इफ यू कैन बी हियर फॉर आवर नेक्स्ट सेशन मे बी एंड प्ले सम काइंड ऑफ अ रोल। थैंक यू वेरी मच everybody. Second session after this tea break is on UN guidelines on NHRIs and the relevance to SHRIs in India. जो यूनाइटेड नेशंस की गाइडलाइंस हैं, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय गाइडलाइंस हैं, जो मानक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय गवर्न करते हैं, जो आधार बनाते हैं नेशनल ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस जितने हमारे देश में उनका, और आपके लिए जो स्टेट ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं उसके लिए इसकी क्या रेलेवेंस है, क्या प्रासंगिकता है, उन अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मानकों के बारे में, उन यूएन गाइडलाइंस के बारे में मिस्टर हेनरी विल टॉक टू अस।
Friends, we'll get on to this first session. My suggestion is that we watch a small video, and before we get into switching on the video, can we have all our mobiles off, please? All our mobiles off, please. Get it out so that we will be referring to it. And kindly remember to bring it for every session. Otherwise, this will become something which you will never open here. And when you go back to your commission, you are very busy, so therefore that will also get lost. Don't mistake me, I am not like that. I also do the same things. If somebody doesn't open it in the training session, we don't open it afterwards. Number one. Number two, you have a pen drive. Do you have a pen drive? Yeah. Like this? Yeah. A box like this?
Yes.
Try opening it now itself so that you don't break it. I broke one already. Not here, the first time. Very good. And that pen drive has all the materials which are contained in page number 180 onwards. The content is in page number 180 to 198. There is almost 4 GB of material. Now, if we put all that material and give you, you will run away from Jindal Law School. So we put some brief material here, very brief material, in light paper so that it is not heavy also for commissioners to carry. (180) to 198 is the content of your pen drive. Okay? So when you have the time, look at the pen drive, and the last agenda on page number 198 are videos. Now those who don't like to read may take the shortcuts first to the video. If the video is interesting, then you start reading. If the video is not interesting, don't read. So we've got 14 videos, simple videos you will see, and I am using one for this session just for you to understand that these are not complicated videos. These are simple videos in very simple English. Okay? So we will start the session with a video. And the video is not half an hour, don't get scared. It's very, very short. Okay, once again. Unfortunately, I can't speak Hindi. Not by my choice, but the choice of my government. Therefore, didn't have, which is very sad. So I apologize to you that I can't communicate in a language that we can all understand, but I will speak with my hands, I will speak with my eyes, I will speak with my body, and I will make sure you don't need translation. But still you will have the chaste, very effective Hindi bits from Harsh.
This time you should behave like a Shamita. Have you seen that? Harsh?
Samita.
Shamita.
Okay.
Have you seen that?
No, I'm anxiously looking at you, hoping you will check what it is, so that I can attempt to follow it. What is it?
See, that's a movie, na? Have you seen that?
No, he has not seen. So that's the problem. He has not seen. I have not seen.
He will translate now whatever you want to speak out, he will translate. I think that is.
And usually translations are much better than the main speaker. So that is how it will be also here.
That is good.
Okay, friends, we are going to have 5 parts of this presentation. 5 small parts of this presentation. First, the distinction between NGOs and national human rights institutions. Name. People get confused with the name. 2, I'll get into what national, state human rights institutions are not. What they are, no. What they are not. This is a very interesting definition. We are not saying what they are. We are going to say what they are not. And what are the main tasks. This is number 2. Number 3, what are the institutions in India? People don't know what the institutions in India are. Number 4, what are the Paris Principles? A little bit of history. What are the Paris Principles? And number 5, developing those principles a little bit. So 5 parts to this presentation. Clear? Now we are using the word national or state human rights institutions. Sometimes the shortcut is to use the word national institutions or state institutions. But it means commissions. So we are referring to commissions. We are referring to commissions. These are all terminology. So let's not get bothered with the terminology. But these are special institutions. They are created by the government. They are created by the Sarkar. They are funded by the government. But they are different. For example, I'm a lawyer by profession. He's a professor by profession. Our platform, INI, or the other organizations that we work with, are non-governmental organizations. We are not established by the government. We are not directly funded only by the government. Sometimes the government might give money and we may take the money. But we are not a governmental institution. We are a non-governmental institution. That does not mean anti-government. It only means non-government. Non-government will never mean anti-government. Many people think non-government means anti-government. Never. We are here to strengthen the constitution of our country. And therefore, sometimes we might criticize a policy of the government. But that doesn't mean we are anti-government. We are non-government. But the NHRIs are not non-government. They are established by the government. They are funded by the government. They are created by the government. They are created under law. But you will see they are independent. I think this is the first point we are making. So when somebody comes to you and asks you who you are, you must be able to say you are from a state human rights institution. Then you can say, I am from SCPCR, I am from SCW. Use the word human rights institution. Don't allow this to be used only by Human Rights Commission. This word belongs to you. Many people are very scared to use state human rights institution. They think it is only the State Human Rights Commission which is the state human rights institution. All of you are part of the state human rights institution. SCPCR, SCW, SCM, SCST, SCSC, State Information Commission, State Commission for Persons with Disabilities, State Commission for Safai Karmacharis, whatever it is, all of you are state human rights institutions, including the State Human Rights Commission. Unfortunately, see, not one State Human Rights Commission is here. There was no State Human Rights Commission last time also. Last time there was. Jammu and Kashmir was here. In Bombay, for Western region, we did not have. Here we had Jammu and Kashmir, present in large number last time. But here we don't have. So, whether you are SCPCR, whether you are SCW, whether you are SCM, whether you are State Information Commission, whatever you are a state human rights institution. Just like the National Human Rights Institution in India. So that's number one. NGOs, State Human Rights Institution.
Briefly, हिंदी साहब ने बताया कि एक इंस्टीट्यूशन, सब इंस्टीट्यूशन है ना, हम लोग यूज नहीं करते हैं उसको, कमीशन जरूर बोलते हैं, लेकिन इंस्टीट्यूशन बोलना जरूरी है क्योंकि ये शब्द इंस्टीट्यूशन सबको बांधता है एक साथ, चाहे नेशनल ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन हो सेंट्रल का, चाहे स्टेट की ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन हो, चाहे बाकी कमीशन हो, चाइल्ड राइट्स, ह्यूमन राइट्स, चाइल्ड SC/ST, तो सब लोग मिलकर ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशन का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है इसको स्ट्रेंथन करते हैं। तो हम सारे लोग जो कमीशंस में हैं, हम लोग ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशन को बिलोंग करते हैं, जिसका हमको प्रयोग करना चाहिए। दूसरी महत्वपूर्ण बात उन्होंने ये बताई कि एक NGO है और एक कमीशन है। NGO कभी कभी सरकार से कुछ मदद जरूर लेते हैं, लेकिन उनका नाम है NGO, नॉन गवर्नमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन। नॉन गवर्नमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का मतलब एंटी गवर्नमेंट नहीं है, सरकार के विरुद्ध नहीं है, जो एक जनरल एक परसेप्शन बन गया है, एक तरह का इंप्रेशन है कि NGO है जो सरकार के खिलाफ है, जो सही नहीं है। NGO जो शब्द है वो सरकारी काम के अलावा आप काम कर रहे हो सिविल सोसाइटी के साथ, और आप संविधान को और संविधान में जो प्रावधान है उनको मजबूत करने के लिए काम करते हैं। सारे NGOs वही काम आप लोग करते हैं ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस। अंतर यह है कि ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस कानून के द्वारा बनाए गए हैं, सरकार ने फंड किया है, आपका एक मैंडेट है, उसके एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय प्रावधान है, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय कॉन्टेक्स्ट है, सरकार ने बनाया, लेकिन आप सरकारी नहीं है। सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि सरकार ने हमसे अलग है, आप भी नॉन गवर्नमेंट नहीं हुए, आप भी एंटी गवर्नमेंट भी नहीं है, प्रो गवर्नमेंट भी नहीं है, आप भी नॉन गवर्नमेंट है ना हुए, NGO नहीं है लेकिन है नॉन गवर्नमेंट। सरकार के स्थापित किए हुए ऐसी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जो स्वतंत्र है, जिनका अलग मैंडेट है, जिसको सरकार ने बनाया है, लेकिन अपने आप इंस्टीट्यूशन है, जिनके अलग पावर है। और पहले भी राजकुमार साहब ने इस बात को बताया था कि सरकार को कटघरे में भी खड़ी करने की पावर, उनको मिरर दिखाने की पावर, उसका प्रावधान पूरे एक्ट में है, पूरे कानून में है।
Yeah. The second part is trying to see what we are not. We are not the judiciary. You are not the judiciary. Even if the State Human Rights Commission has a former judge as its chairman, they are not the judiciary. They don't pass orders. They don't pass judgments. They pass recommendations, just like each one of you do. So we are not the judiciary. We might have an old judge as a member. Maybe the Haryana Commission for Women can have a retired woman judge appointed. But that doesn't make her a judge. She is there as chairperson of the Haryana Women Commission. The SCPCR in Himachal Pradesh might have a retired district judge appointed. No problem. But that doesn't mean that the chairperson has the right of the duties, responsibilities, or powers of a judge. So we are not the judiciary. Clear? We are not the executive. You might be the chairperson, you might be a member, but you are not an executive. The executive are sitting in the Mantralaya. They are sitting in the headquarters. They execute because they are government servants. Their business is to execute, to carry on the directions of the government. You are not executives. You are a commission with a different objective. Many people come to you and tell you, I am a member secretary. Therefore, I am a member, I am a secretary. You understand this English?
Yeah.
I am a member, I am a secretary. I will also function as a member, I will also function as a secretary. No. They are there to serve the commission. They are the chief executive officers of the commission. They are your executive. They are your chief executive. But the decision making is the chairperson and members collectively. This is very important. Therefore, you are not the executive, you are a commission which is different from being an executive. Number 3, I'll finish the forum. Number 3, you are not the legislature, you are not making laws. The law is made by the state legislature, by our elected MLAs, or in a central legislation by our elected parliamentarians. You are not making the law. You may not like the law. You may not like the law. The law may be wrong. The law may be bad. You can recommend to the government, but you are not making the law. So you are not the legislature. But you can write to the legislature. You can write to the ministry and say, in our wisdom, this law we find for so and so reasons has to be changed to better help women, to better help children, to better help homeless people, etc., etc. So you can recommend things, but you are yourself are not the legislature. You are not the judiciary, you are not the executive, you are not the legislature. Rajkumar, Professor already said, you are not an NGO. You are not an NGO. You have the freedom to work like the NGO perhaps, but you are not an NGO. NGO is still different. Don't convert yourself into an NGO because it's a very, very rare position that you have. NGOs are different. And last, you are not the United Nations also. Don't think because you are working on women's rights, child rights, disability rights, right to information, minority rights, etc. You are the United Nations. You are not the United Nations. So you are not the United Nations, you are not the NGO, you are not a judiciary, you are not a legislature, you are not an executive. But sir, what am I? You are a very special creation in this engagement in human rights. We will come to see what you are. It's a very special creation. It's a very delicate creation. It's a very new creation. And this new creation is gathering more strength, more powers, more responsibilities. And today, we have come to a stage where national human rights institutions have the capacity to take the floor in the General Assembly. So in the General Assembly, our Prime Minister can take the floor. But in the General Assembly, our chairperson of the NHRC can also take the floor today. That is the change that has happened so far. So it is growing. The World Committee of Nations are respecting national and state human rights institutions more and more, and also giving space for them to be represented in Geneva, in the Human Rights Council, but also in New York, in the human rights, in the General Assembly, and in various bodies. So state and national human rights institutions are very important in that.
Okay. दूसरी बात जो बताई, पहली बात मैंने बता दी कि हम लोग न्यायपालिका नहीं है। कई बार लगता है कि कमीशन को कुछ अधिकार हैं, जो पावर्स हैं वो रिकमेंडरी हैं। आप रिकमेंडेशन दे सकते हो, आप सुझाव दे सकते हो, कोई ऑर्डर नहीं पास कर सकते। हालांकि अभी 2 दिनों में इस पर भी बात हुई, किस तरह से अगर आपकी रिकमेंडेशन इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं हुई है कुछ लोगों की, बहुत सी कमीशन की, तो उसको इम्प्लीमेंट करने के लिए हम कोर्ट जा सकते हैं, वो अलग बात है। लेकिन पावर रिकमेंडेशन की है। बहुत से जुडिशरी के लोग होते हैं जजेस, लेकिन किसी भी कीमत पे न्यायपालिका नहीं है। तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है समझना कि काम लगता है कि जजों की तरह है, कोर्ट लगती है, सुनते हैं, केसेस आते हैं, लेकिन जुडिशरी नहीं है, न्यायपालिका कहीं नहीं है, हमारा अधिकार अलग है। उसी तरह से कार्यपालिका नहीं है, एग्जीक्यूटिव पे नहीं है। उन्होंने एक मेंबर सेक्रेटरी एग्जाम्पल दिया, सब लोगों के पास मेंबर सेक्रेटरी होते हैं। मेंबर सेक्रेटरी एक सरकारी आदमी, मेंबर्स जिस तरह से कि ब्यूरोक्रेसी सेंटर में एग्जीक्यूटिव है, पार्लियामेंट, विधानसभा, लेजिस्लेचर जो कानून बनाती है उसको ब्यूरोक्रेट्स इंप्लीमेंट करते हैं, उसी तरह से जो मेंबर सेक्रेटरी है वो उस तरह की मेंबर्स की पावर नहीं है जो आपकी है। मेंबर सेक्रेटरी जो आप लोग जो करोगे उसको इंप्लीमेंट करने के लिए पावर आपके पास है। जैसे ब्यूरोक्रेसी जो कानून जो बनाते हैं उसको इंप्लीमेंट करने का काम करती है, उसी तरह से मेंबर सेक्रेटरी एग्जीक्यूटिव का आदमी है। और मेंबर सेक्रेटरी और आपका जो डिफरेंस है वो ये है कि जो भी आप जो डिसाइड करेंगे वो मेंबर सेक्रेटरी कार्यपालिका की तरह से या एग्जीक्यूटिव की तरह से उसका काम करेंगे, आपके इन वे सीईओ है। तीसरी बात उन्होंने बताया कि आप लेजिस्लेटिव बनने की बात हुई कि कानून बनाने का काम भी नहीं है। एक अजीब से एक अद्वितीय यूनिक स्पेशल पोजीशन है कि ना हम कानून बना रहे हैं, ना हम जो कानून बने हुए केवल हमने उनका पालन करना है, ना हम जज हैं और ना हम एनजीओ हैं। एनजीओ के साथ काम करना है लेकिन एनजीओ नहीं बनना है। बार बार एम्फसाइज कर रहे हैं कि एनजीओ सरकार दोनों से इक्वी डिस्टेंस। एनजीओ भी बहुत ज्यादा एनजीओ के साथ दिखेंगे तो रहेंगे एंटी गवर्नमेंट प्रो एनजीओ हो गए, बहुत ज्यादा सरकार के साथ दिखेंगे तो लगेगा कि तो सरकारी स्टैंप है, अपने आदमियों को बिठा दिया। तो एक अजीब स्पेशल मैंडेट है। और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय और यूएन भी नहीं है। पांचवी बात उन्होंने बताई कि क्योंकि पूरे ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस जितनी बॉडीज है सबका जो ओरिजिन है वो एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय परिप्रेक्ष्य में है, एक इसका अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संदर्भ है, एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय ह्यूमन राइट्स आंदोलन चला है, उसके तहत तमाम देशों में ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस पैदा हुए हैं। हमारे यहाँ भी प्रोटेक्शन ह्यूमन राइट्स एक्ट जो आया है उसके बाद ही आया है। लेकिन इसके बावजूद हम एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय फ्रेमवर्क में है, लेकिन हम यूएन से हमारा यूनाइटेड नेशंस संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ से भी कोई डायरेक्ट उस तरह का कोई लिंक नहीं है। इसलिए उन्होंने लास्ट बात ये कही कि स्पेशल एंटिटी है। सबसे पहले ये समझना, इससे पहले कि हम जाने कि क्या सही है, कैसे न्याय दे रहा है, ये जानना बहुत जरूरी है हम क्या है। न सरकार है, न एनजीओ है, न कार्यपालिका, न न्यायपालिका, न यूएन है, एक स्पेशल, लेकिन इसके बावजूद एक स्पेशल एंटिटी है, बहुत सारी शक्तियां हैं, बहुत सारी पावर्स है। और जो पूरा ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस का जो 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 ये मैकेनिज्म है ये दुनिया भर में धीरे धीरे करके उठ रहा है। 10 साल पहले लोग कम जानते थे, आज पूरी दुनिया में ज्यादा लोग जानते हैं, भारत में जानते हैं। सो ये पूरा ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशंस का प्रावधान हर दिन उभर रहा है, ज्यादा से ज्यादा ग्रो कर रहा है।
The tasks, the work of state human rights institutions or national human rights institutions can be generally categorized into 3 heads. A, C. Advisory role, A. So you are there to advise the government. You are supposed to advise the government. Whether government accepts your advice, I don't know. But you have to advise the government on your subject. SCPCR will advise the government on matters relating to children. Also advise the government on right to education, because you are monitoring the RTE Act. Also advise the government on child sexual offences, because you are monitoring the POCSO Act. So you are, one task is advisory. Don't say the government never asks advice. Whether government asks or not, your duty is to give advice. Look into your functions. You will find advice there. Number 2, another A, awareness. Not inaugural functions and valedictory functions. People always like to call you for inaugurating a conference. always call you for the last session in a conference. Tell them, I want to be there throughout the conference. Because my duty is, as a SCPCR, SCM, SCW, SIC, etc., to create awareness. And you will create awareness through trainings, you can create awareness through seminars, but you can also create awareness through the radio, you can create awareness through the television, you can create awareness through articles, through interviews, through statements, awareness. In your state, for your category of people, to officers, get experts, your business is to create awareness. Sir, I myself am not very aware. What do? No problem. You call experts, but you stand there and you govern the awareness program. You run the awareness program. But I don't have a bank account. Some commissions come and say, Henry, hold on, I don't have a bank account. So tell them, you must have not only bank account, but you should have money in the bank account to use for awareness. Awareness will not just come like that. You have to publish materials, pamphlets. I saw some wonderful material. I don't want to distinguish between commission, but somebody gave me this, so I saw beautiful material, charter for children at risk, very carefully thought out material. I think Chandigarh Commission for Child Rights. You finally approved there is a commission in Chandigarh. I was amazed. Is there anybody from the Chandigarh Commission for Child Rights? No. Materials are here, the person is not here. Material, the person is not here. Anyhow, so awareness is created through materials like this, pamphlets. For children, it may be a film, it may be a sticker, it may be different things. So one is advisory, second one is awareness. And the third one, which you are all doing, is complaints handling. Receiving complaints and handling those complaints. Complaints handling. So advisory role, awareness role, complaints handling role. If you look at your functions in your act, you will see that all our functions fall under these three categories of advisory, awareness, complaints handling. That is our tasks. And this is what the global community is expecting also from you. You are part of a global community. I'm coming to that soon. You are part of a larger community. You are not Haryana wala. You are not only a Himachal Pradesh wala. You are not only a Punjab wala. You are part of this country's institutions and you are part of the global company of institutions working for the protection of human rights across the globe. Yes.
पहला रूल बताया एडवाइजरी का, 3 रूल हैं। पहला रूल एडवाइस देने का। एक बात उन्होंने एम्फसाइज किया है कि कई बार हमको लगता है कि सरकार ने बना दिया कानून है और बात खत्म हो गई। कानून कोई और बना रहा है, लेकिन कानून में अगर बदलाव की जरूरत है या कहीं पे ह्यूमन राइट में कुछ, सरकार को एडवाइस दे सकते हैं इवन कानून बनाने का, बदलने की। अगर कहीं कानून की कमी है तो ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन कानून में बनना चाहिए, हमारे राज्य में ये हो रहा है, देश में ये हो रहा है, इसके लिए इस तरह के कानून की जरूरत है, हम सरकार को एडवाइस दे सकते हैं। तो केवल जो कानून में है उसको क्रियान्वयन करना ही नहीं, बल्कि कानून बनाना है, सरकार को कुछ गलत काम अगर हो रहा है उसके खिलाफ या अच्छे काम के पक्ष में सरकार को हमें एडवाइस देने का एक बड़ी कैटेगरी हमारे फंक्शन की है। दूसरा अवेयरनेस, एनडी साहब ने बताया कि शिक्षा ह्यूमन राइट्स के बारे में, शिक्षा के बारे में, वायलेशन के बारे में, अच्छा काम जो हो रहा है, पब्लिसिटी, पीआर, प्रेस रिलीज, रेडियो, फिल्म छोटी, जहां भी आप जाते हैं वहाँ इन चीज़ों पे बात करना। अवेयरनेस कि चेतना अधिकारों के बारे में, जो भी हमारा क्षेत्र है उस क्षेत्र में जो अधिकारों का हनन हो रहा है, जो होना चाहिए उसके बारे में ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा पब्लिसिटी, कमीशन के बारे में पब्लिसिटी जो हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं। बहुत से लोगों को कमीशन का पता नहीं हिंदुस्तान में, मेजॉरिटी को पता नहीं कमीशन क्या होते हैं, कमीशन के पास क्यों जाना चाहिए। कई लोगों को लगता है कमीशन कोर्ट है, कई लोगों को लगता है कमीशन एनजीओ है। तो उस बारे में भी, अपने बारे में, अपने काम के बारे में और अपने क्षेत्र के अधिकारों के बारे में चेतना फैलाना दूसरा काम है। और तीसरा कंप्लेंट हैंडलिंग, जो कि सबसे ज़्यादा पॉपुलर काम है कि शिकायतें आती हैं, शिकायतों का निवारण करना, शिकायतें सुनना, एड्रेस करना, लेना, समझना और शिकायतों को एड्रेस करना। ब्रॉडली जो 3 कैटेगरी हैं, सलाह देना, चेतना, उसके बारे में चेतना फैलाना और शिकायतों को हैंडल करना, ये 3 ब्रॉड कैटेगरी हैं जिसके अंदर जितने भी ह्यूमन राइट्स इंस्टीट्यूशन है उनके तमाम काम इन 3 श्रेणियों के अंतर्गत आते हैं।
Now, in this country, we have plenty of institutions. Globally, there are usually 3 types of institutions. One is commissions, like we have, Indian model, commissions. Chairperson, vice chairperson, or no vice chairperson, members, staff, commissions. A second model globally are institutions, which are not like commissions. These are like research institutions. Denmark, Germany, these are all good examples. In Asia we don't have, but in Europe you have these institutions, which are like an NGO, but a research institution. The Danish Center for Human Rights is a very well-known global national human rights institution, but it is only an institution, it's not like a commission. They have done a lot of research and work on business and human rights, which the ICC is using. The third model, again we don't have in India, is the ombudsman model, which is present in one country in Southeast Asia, which is in East Timor, formerly Indonesia, East Timor, the new country East Timor. They have an ombudsman. And a lot of Latin American countries, South American countries have ombudsmen. So there are 3 models: commission model, institute model, ombudsman model. India has followed the commission model. That is why all of you are commissions. But in India we have 9 national human rights institutions. You call the Secretary General of the NHRC right now. He is in Dwarka. They are all sitting there. They are thinking about a major agenda of theirs which they forgot for the last 23 years. Today they have woken up and they are looking at an agenda of legal literacy, which is one of their functions. I know it because Maya Darwala is there and she is going to come from there directly here. You call Mr. Mohanty, the Secretary General, and ask him, how many institutions are there, national human rights institutions are there in India? He might take a cigarette, he might light up a cigarette, and then he might stop after 2 or 3. He's a good friend of mine, that's why I'm taking the liberty of saying this. That's because they don't realize this. It's not that Mr. Mohanty is a bad person, Mr. Mohanty is a very nice person. I'm telling you, he's my friend. But Mr. Mohanty was working in another department earlier. He is now suddenly shifted into human rights. Poor man, first day he will not be able to say anything because he has to learn. And by the time Mr. Mohanty learns, he will be told, Mr. Mohanty, your retirement is on the 31st of this month. The National Human Rights Commission in the last 5 years had Secretary General only for 3.5 years, or a little more than 3.5 years. But they had 5 Secretary Generals. In 3.5 years, 5 Secretary Generals. Nice, no? You will come, you will study, you will start functioning, and you will leave. Then the new man will come, he will start learning, he takes 3 months to learn. If he is a slow learner, he will take a little longer time. If he is a typical bureaucrat, he will never learn, which means more difficulty for everybody in the commission. And by the time he has made enough mistakes, he is told, retirement, sir. Very difficult. A chief executive of an institution has to be there for a longer period of time. We have 9 institutions in this country. No other country in the world has 9 such institutions. You have countries which have 2, 3, but not 9. You have a National Human Rights Commission. Can that thing go up? And do you have a pen there? You have a white pen there?